on my terms. If not, you can walk away and find someone else.
What do you mean by cashing out? I'm confused.
I'm getting a lot of money now, a hell of a lot of money. A lot of money to step aside.
You're not going to get more for this fight.
Listen, let me tell you, a lot of money to step aside. Then also, Andy Lee or Peter Quillen, it's a 50-50 split with me and Lee if Lee wins. And we've already got some to go to America, to the States. So it's a lot of money, mate.
Not more than this.
Well, it probably is more than that at the minute, because I thought I am your major. So that belt don't mean nothing. Listen, don't think I boxed you, that belt wouldn't be on the line. If you want to box me, I'm not fighting for that. I want to embarrass myself. Listen, that belt's no good. That belt is no good.
Worry about the money.
Listen, when we fight, let me tell you one thing. When we fight, we don't...
Boxing truth here. More Billy Joe Saunders, Chris Eubank Jr. drama. As Eubank Jr. did an interview with Sky Sports claiming that Billy Joe Saunders is just ducking and dodging, taking easy money fights and avoiding the rematch with Chris Eubank Jr., which prompted a response from, of course, Billy Joe Saunders, that they offered Eubank Jr. a good sum of money, perhaps close to 7 figures, for a rematch to take place earlier this year, which never came to fruition, even making some insiders look bad because they predicted the rematch would happen earlier this year. But I just wanted to talk about this story, the Eubank Jr. Billy Joe Saunders rematch that hasn't happened, because it's one of the many interesting stories in the boxing world today. Who's ducking who? Who's ducking the rematch? Who's really putting an effort to make this rematch happen? But the truth is, both guys have taken turns ducking and dodging the rematch with each other. It's true. In the clip I shared before this video, you can see that Billy Joe Saunders let his ego get the best of him. He felt he defeated Chris Eubank Jr. definitively, but he didn't. It was a close fight, split decision, and like Eubank Jr. said, the people want to see the fight. People have their difference of opinions. We need to clear the air in the second fight. But Billy Joe Saunders wasn't trying to hear it. He wanted to position himself into a world title fight, which he did. He was already the mandatory challenger to Andy Lee's WBO strap at the time. But he was waiting in line just like every other contender does, especially when there's other named fighters looking to get that type of to get a title fight with Andy Lee. For instance, Peter Quillen, Billy Joe Saunders had to take step-aside money in order for that fight to get made between Andy Lee and Peter Quillen. And then finally, Billy Joe Saunders got his shot against Andy Lee and won the title. But he did so leaving money on the table with a Eubank Jr. rematch. It's true, Eubank Jr. was a bigger money fight for him, for Billy Joe Saunders, compared to an Andy Lee fight. But Andy Lee had the world title. Eubank Jr. had an interim strap for the WBA. And as you saw in the video, in the clip, Billy Joe Saunders trashed it. He says, "I'm not fighting for that bogus belt. Don't want to embarrass myself." And Eubank Jr. had that interim strap for a short time. He only made like one defense of the title. Won it in his preceding fight after. In his subsequent fight after the loss of Billy Joe Saunders in defeating Dmitry Shudanov and winning that interim strap, which was the first undefeated fighter he defeated at the time, as Billy Joe Saunders stated that Eubank Jr. has never defeated an undefeated fighter. But it's not true, he has. He's defeated one undefeated fighter. Eubank Jr. has. But Billy Joe Saunders didn't want the rematch last year. Eubank Jr. did. He wanted the fight. It's a big money fight for both guys. But Billy Joe Saunders has a lot of hatred towards Eubank Jr. He wanted him to prove himself. He wanted him to earn the rematch, even though he won a razor thin decision against Eubank Jr. in the first fight. He wanted him to take on some of the fighters he defeated, which Eubank Jr. did. His last 2 fights, he took on Billy Joe Saunders' leftovers, and Nick Blackwell and Spike O'Sullivan. Now, in comparison between the both guys and those performances against those guys, Billy Joe Saunders dominated Spike O'Sullivan, outboxed him. He also outboxed Nick Blackwell, but it was a closer fight compared to the O'Sullivan fight. And Eubank Jr., he had better performances against those guys. He put on more impressive displays, a more impressive display of offense. He beat both guys up and dominated them and stopped them. Eubank Jr. had some rough moments. He got rocked a couple of times in the O'Sullivan fight. Took some shots against Nick Blackwell, but overall he put on great performances and stopped both guys. He had more impressive performances compared to Billy Joe Saunders. So it only made sense for the rematch to happen earlier this year. But Eubank Jr. started ducking and dodging the rematch after his performance against O'Sullivan. He was offered a great sum of money, close to 7 figures according to reports, and he didn't take the fight. Even relinquished his interim strap, the bogus belt he had in that clip for the WBA, walking away, according to Frank Warren, from a WBA regular shot against Danny Jacobs, who holds a regular strap. As a WBA is just a mess right now. But that's the thing. In my opinion, I don't feel Eubank Jr. cost himself a shot against Danny Jacobs, because the WBA hasn't done a good job in enforcing these title bouts between these bogus champions, regular, interim. I mean, just look at the newest ratings from the WBA. Gilberto Mendoza Jr. made a promise to the boxing world. He said that he will start getting rid of these bogus belts, start mandating bouts between the champions, the extra champions in the boxing world, in order to limit just one WBA champion. But hey, look at the ratings. It hasn't happened. Still a bunch of interim, regular champions in a number of divisions. He just hasn't been able to get it done. So I don't feel Eubank Jr. cost himself a shot against Danny Jacobs. Heyman and Jacobs never made an effort to make the fight. I'm not even saying Eubank Jr. did, but when you're an interim champion for the WBA, you're pretty much the number 1 contender for the regular strap. So you have to wait till the WBA enforces a bout between the two parties. But that never happened. So Eubank Jr. never really, he didn't cost himself a title shot, because that fight was never materialized. It was never negotiated. It was never enforced. So what the hell is Eubank Jr. supposed to do? Just sit around, wait around, and not fight? So he kept fighting, and he positioned himself to fight for the British title, a title he's always wanted since he became a fighter, because his father never won the British title. So he felt he needed to accomplish that for his family, and he did. He won the British title. But now it's on to some bigger and better things. But this is where Eubank Jr. gets criticized, and it's rightfully so. He should get criticized. Some of the decisions he makes. He's an unpredictable guy. Just you can't figure him out. Does things and says things that just makes you scratch your head. You want him to do something, and then he does the exact opposite. And of course, a lot of people have their doubts about him fighting Triple G, Chris Eubank Jr. But this is the most vocal he's ever been about fighting Triple G, especially his father. I mean, Senior. This is the most vocal he's ever been about that fight. And maybe he's delusional enough to make it happen, to pull the trigger with his son to take on Triple G. But it's understandable the doubts people have. I mean, just look at Frank Warren's true feelings. about Eubank Jr.'s call out on Triple G.
Well, here's another one. You've got Eubank Senior. You've got youngster keeps calling out.
Golovkin.
Billy Joe.
Oh,
Then they're calling out Golovkin. And now he's fighting that young lad from Wales.
Tom Don.
Compton's professional. I'm not being disrespectful with him. What are you talking about him for when you walked away as the WBA interim champion from Jacobs? That's what he did, didn't he?
Yeah.
Right, he walked away. Just making sure I've got it right. He was offered a straight fight with Billy Joe Saunders. No options, no nothing. Get it on. Never heard from him again. Never ever heard from him again. Took every obstacle away. Come on, win a take all. I don't mean personal, but winner walks away with a title. Never heard from him again. So, and then he calls out Golovkin. What is he doing? He's fighting a guy from Wales on the undercard of that show. It's bullshit. It's an insult to the fans.
So it's understandable why Frank Warren feels the way he does. They offered a fight, a rematch to Eubank Jr.'s team late last year for a fight earlier this year for the world title. This is when Saunders was a champion for the WBO. And there was never any dialogue. There was never any returned offers. There was no serious negotiations. They never heard from the Eubank Jr. team, and he went on to fight for the British title. And of course, Eubank Jr. will state his reasons. So both guys have took turns in ducking and dodging a rematch with each other. One because of ego, another because he wanted to fulfill a personal goal. But I also have my doubts about Eubank Jr. I mean, how are you going to go from fighting Tom Duran to fighting Triple G? A British level fighter who's faced no world-class opposition, who is undefeated but not at that level, and then go on to fight Triple G. And yet you're trying to get into the Olympics as well. Submit an application even, only to get turned down because the British board already has a fighter secured for that spot in the middleweight division for the Olympics. So you was turned down to fulfill your Olympic glory. It's not like it would have any effect of his career. The Olympic Games take place in August. It's only 2 weeks, so it's not like it would have affected Eubank Jr.'s professional career. He still could have fought in September if he wanted to. But if it were up to me, the scenario I would like, and I stated this before, these two should fight each other. The winner gets Golovkin. And then hopefully Canelo steps up and fights Triple G later this year. Even though that fight still needs a little marination, but if these two guys end up fighting each other, there's no opponents for Triple G. He'll end up fighting another no-name guy, and that's not what anybody in the boxing world wants. They want to see him fight the best, most recognizable name opponent out there. But that's the scenario I would like. These two to have a rematch, and the winner fights the GGG Canelo winner. As the middleweight division is one of the top divisions to talk about in boxing. There's a lot of named fighters. There's good fighters. There's punchers, boxers, guys with weak chins, guys that we don't know if they're the real deal. Another guy who's on the verge of making history, but yet doesn't have a recognizable name on his resume, or not the biggest names. We just need some clarity in the middleweight division. A lot of names, but not many fights being made. Not many fights materializing. Just a lot of boxing talk, but just not enough action. As this division is still trying to clarify himself, even though Triple G is a triple unified champion. But he still has a lot of fights to be made, still some hardware to collect. And as for Billy Joe Saunders, he needs to get back in the ring, man. It's unfortunate he pulled out of the fight in April against a handpicked opponent in the WO rankings, but it's a lot better to be active than sitting on the shelf. But of course, he's waiting to see how the Triple G talks go. But that's my concern. As in that video with Frank Warren on Eiffel TV, his most recent interview. What's changed since Billy Joe Saunders initially turned down the offer to fight Triple G in America, which is around 1.5, maybe 2 million to come to the States? I mean, what's really changed? Billy Joe Saunders has yet to make a first defense of his title. And according to Frank Warren, if Billy Joe Saunders is going to take this fight, the money has to be right. But that's my question. What has changed with the money? The most I could see Billy Joe Saunders getting is $2 million to fight Triple G. By coming over to the States, Triple G's the A side. He don't have to come to the UK. It's not like Billy Joe Saunders is the biggest draw in the UK. Eddie Hearn will argue that Eubank Jr. fight is bigger for Triple G, that he's a much bigger draw in the UK compared to Billy Joe Saunders, that he gets a lot more buzz. It's hard to argue with that. But that's my concern with Saunders. I don't think the money's changed for a Triple G fight. And it's not like Triple G won't come to the UK. He would. But is the money going to be life-changing enough for Billy Joe Saunders? Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. Still waiting on some answers, but we ain't going to get them for a while, as this is going to be another dragged-out process on a number of middleweights who they're fighting, especially the top middleweights. But Billy Joe Saunders' inactivity is hurting him. He's getting disrespected by BoxRec. Just look at the ratings. He's rated number 7 now. And look who's above him. Chris Eubank Jr. is number 5. And look who's above both those guys, which is a joke. An imposter. A regular champion. Danny Jacobs. He's rated number 3. And he hasn't fought in 7 months. He's been on the shelf, and he's about to fight another pointless rematch against Sergio Mora on July 30th. But we'll see what happens in the middleweight division. Both of these guys, Eubank Jr., Saunders, have ducked and dodged each other for the rematch for different reasons. It is one of their biggest money fights on the table. And it only makes sense for them two to fight again compared to a Triple G fight, because most in the boxing world don't see either of these guys putting up a competitive fight. Most in the boxing world feel these guys don't have what it takes to beat a Triple G. So maybe they should fight each other, as it's a more, what many see as a more competitive fight between the two. And still we need a definitive answer on who's better between these two guys. But it just doesn't look like it's going to happen. This is Boxing Truth. I'm out.